And I am just so excited because our next guest is here, Eric K. Johnson. And Eric is, he's the podcast talent coach, okay? There are a lot of podcasts out there and coaches who teach you the technological side or the technical side of podcasting, but Eric's different. He's the premier coach focused on the art of podcasting as a talent. So he's been atop the radio ratings since 2000 and coached many others to greater success because he uses he uses what he's mastered in radio to help coaches attract their ideal clients with their podcast. Eric is a nationally recognized podcast and radio talent coach, an on-air personality and radio program director seen on stage at Podcast Movement, New Media Expo, Authority and Influencer Summit, and more. I feel so lucky that Eric agreed to join us today. So, hey there, Eric.
Hey, Demont. How are you?
I am good. It's been one of those experiences where we had a few technical difficulties to deal with. They never happen, right?
It's not a summit without some technical difficulties.
Exactly. It's like, I keep talking about divorcing yourself from the results of the sales conversation. It's also, you have to do it with everything. It's just, it just happens.
Absolutely.
So anyway, Eric, I know you are here to talk about some very exciting things, and I wonder if I just gave a brief outline, of your story and your background, but I wonder if you could tell us what drew you to doing the podcast and helping other people really develop their talent.
It was about 2009. I was listening to podcasts. I discovered the world of podcasting back in 2005 is really when it got on my radar. I saw an article in Wired magazine that talked about the invention of this new thing called podcasting. And Adam Curry from MTV was recording podcasts from the front seat of his BMW. And I thought, this is crazy. Like this, but I'm not a tech guy and have no idea what he was talking about. He was talking about RSS feeds and all of this other stuff. And I thought, that's over my head. So 2009, I have an iPhone. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm in radio, and I'm loving podcasting because it was like the old days of radio where you had full control over your show, what you talked about, who you talked about it with, how long you talked about it. It was great. And where the creativity was being sucked out of radio and it was becoming very homogenized and lowest common denominator and top-down management.
Yeah.
Podcasting was like the new frontier, right? It was all of these great shows talking about, and at the time there were maybe, 75,000 podcasts. There weren't a ton.
Yeah. How many are there now? It's got to be.
It's coming up on 4 million. Like podcasting is growing like mad. The pandemic poured gas on the fire. So many people were sitting at home looking for new forms of entertainment, and they started creating podcasts. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to these podcasts.
I'm sorry, you're right, Eric, because when I listen to podcasts, and I'm old enough and I'll admit to this, I remember that transistor radio I got when I was 12 years old, and listening to those shows. And and I still fall asleep to podcasts because it's like having a friend there talking to you.
Exactly. And listening to transistor radios back in the day, it transported you to another time and place.
Oh, absolutely.
And in 2009, as I'm listening to these podcasts, I thought, man, if they just put some of the strategies and tactics in place that we used on the radio to attract an audience and motivate that audience to do something, their podcasts could be so much more effective and so much more powerful. And so I started looking for coaches who taught that. And every coach I found taught how to create a podcast, how to launch a podcast, how to get your podcast on iTunes, how to hook up your microphone. But nobody taught how to use the podcast to market your business, how to use the podcast to grow an audience, build your influence, and leave your mark on the world. And so that's when I decided to launch Podcast Talent Coach to help podcasters learn the techniques that we use on the radio to attract an audience, build a relationship with that audience, and market your business so you can leave your impact on the world.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And so I'm wondering how people find you. I mean, you know, it's like you said, there are 4 million podcasts out there.
Yeah, right.
It must make it hard to stand out, though.
Well, a lot of people think if you build it, they will come. Right. I launch a podcast and now everybody should just flock to me. And people say, man,
that was my approach to my first business.
Yeah, right. Where are all the customers? Right. That's the marketing part of it. And that's why I love being on summits like this. The Digital Marketing Summit teaches you how to go out and get in front of your ideal client and bring them to you. And when it comes to using your podcast to market your business, there are two sides of the equation. There's the side where you have to go out and get in front of people who don't know you and invite them into your world. So go get on other stages, get on other podcasts, get on summits, get on virtual events, speak to masterminds, be on live events, on stages, get in front of people who don't know you and bring them into your world. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is to keep your current listeners coming back week after week with engaging content, with an effective email marketing strategy, with a social media strategy. So many podcasters, they go out and they get new listeners, but they don't do anything to bring them back. And it's like putting water in a bucket that has holes in the bottom. The more water you put in, the more water leaks out. You don't get any more water because it's all going away. It's like inviting people to your party and you're greeting everybody at the front door and they're leaving out the back door. And you wonder why nobody's at your party. Right? You have to keep them there.
There were all these people here. It was a great party.
Where did they go? Right, exactly. So you have to feed both sides of that equation.
Yeah.
And to your point, there are almost 4 million podcasts. How do you get noticed? Well, you go out and you get in front of people who don't know you and you bring them into your world, get them on your email list so you can nurture them. And every time you release a new episode, email your list. So many people say, Eric, my podcast isn't growing. And I say, well, what do you do when you release a new episode? They say, well, I email my list and I post it on social media. And I say, well, those people already know about you. If they're going to listen to your podcast, they would already be listening. So how are you getting in front of new people? Serve both sides of that equation. And I know that 4 million number sounds crazy. Like, holy cow, how am I going to be one of 4 million? Two things you need to understand. First, of those 4 million podcasts that are out there, only about half of them actively publish new episodes. A lot of them fade away. A lot of podcasters fade away after about 6 or 8 episodes because it's more work than they thought it was going to be because they don't have a strategy to actively produce an episode every week without eating up their entire week.
Yeah.
Their audience doesn't grow as fast as they thought it would because they don't come to amazing events like this and figure out how to effectively market what they do and get in front of new people. They don't have a strategy, and it doesn't make money as fast as they thought it would because they don't have a strategy to turn their audience into clients. So of the 4 million, only about half of them are actively publishing. And then the second thing you need to remember is that there are 600 million blogs out there. So if you're trying to post a blog and get people to that, you want to be 4 million, 1 in 4 million, or 1 in 600 million. Even on YouTube, there's like 53 or 56 million YouTube channels. So, and they keep changing their algorithm every time. And when you subscribe to a YouTube channel, it's not like it's showing up on your phone when you open up YouTube. It's feeding you what YouTube wants to feed you. When you open up your podcast player, it feeds you the shows that you subscribe to. And you're right there creating that relationship with your audience.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's really intimidating. And I do not have a podcast. I will admit that. And I need to open that conversation with you, Eric.
Absolutely.
Because I just love the idea. And I know someone who worked with you and has had a very successful podcast. So I know that you know what I'm having trouble talking to. You know what you speak of, or of what you speak. So I know that it's it's challenging if you don't know what you're doing getting in. And
Well, yeah, like I just mentioned with those three issues, right? It's more work than people thought it was going to be because they go and they search on YouTube, like, how do I launch a podcast? And there's
yeah,
a million YouTube videos out there and they each teach you a different way, and you're trying to duct tape it all together and figure out how to launch because you don't have a strategy. I run people through my podcast fast blueprint. What I tell people is launching the podcast isn't the challenge. Growing it and using it effectively is the challenge. I teach people how to launch a podcast in 3 days. I get them in my podcast fast blueprint workshop, and we start on Friday. By Sunday, your show is published to the world. Like, launching the podcast isn't the challenge. Keeping it going, that's the challenging part. And so what I help my clients do is I help them build a strategy so the podcast doesn't eat your entire week. You create it quickly and easily in a methodical way. So you get in and you do it chunk by chunk and you knock it out. So it's there every week and you're getting in front of your audience and you're building that relationship. And then with my higher end clients, I handle all of the production for them. So all they have to do is show up and look pretty and perform. And then I take care of everything else.
they don't even have to look pretty because it's a podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. We produce all their audio for them. If they want, what I teach people to do, because a lot of people say, Eric, should I do YouTube or should I do a podcast? Which one should I spend my time doing? I recommend you do both. So if you're going to record an interview style podcast, like let's say you and I are recording a podcast right now, we record it like we are. What I will do for my clients, I will take this video and I will use that for the YouTube video, and we'll edit it. We'll create the YouTube thumbnail, put it on YouTube for them. Then I'll take the audio from this and I'll use that to create the podcast, and we'll edit the audio and upload it to their audio host and everything. And then we'll create all these social media assets. They'll get a full week of social media assets from the content that we create so they can use that to market their show. But here's the thing to understand. YouTube, one of the largest search engines in the world, that will help you get discovered, right? So be on YouTube. However, with a podcast, you're having a one-on-one conversation with your listener. You're in their ear. You're in their earbuds, right? They're listening, and you're having that very intimate one-on-one conversation with them. And that's how you build relationships with people. YouTube, they have to be active and they have to be engaged and they have to be watching the video.
Yeah.
With your podcast, they can do it while they're riding their bike or while they're taking a shower or while they're driving a car or while they're working out at the gym. You're their companion. They're listening to you because they don't want to do whatever it is they're doing by themselves. You're their friend and you're along with them. They don't want to work out by themselves, so they have you along for the ride. You're in their ear, talking to them, motivating them while they're working out.
Wow.
That's the difference between podcasting and YouTube.
And now that you mentioned that, I walk, well, when I can. We are in Cleveland. But I try and walk, several times a week. And just recently, I started listening to podcasts because I've always listened to music because it inspires me to go faster and all that. But I've found that I'm learning so much more, and I'm enjoying it. You're right. It's in a time when so many people are lonely. Yeah. As a reaction because of the pandemic, really. I mean, it brought a lot of us, to that area. And there are so many people I can think of, friends who just felt isolated during that time. And having that friend in your ear, who's whispering in your ear is just, I can see where that would be really comforting. And you would get to think of that person as someone you are having a conversation with.
The most fulfilling conversations I have is when I meet somebody for the first time and they say, Eric, I know we've never met, but I feel like I know you. I feel like we've been friends for so long because I've listened to your show for so long and I know so much about you that I feel like I know you, even though this is the first time we're meeting. And that's when I know the podcast is powerful. And when you take your podcast and you infuse it with your story and with your personality, with your authenticity, that's what builds that friendship with your listener. And that's what sets you apart from everybody else in your niche, because they can all copy your 6 steps to success, your secret magic formula. What they can't copy is you. They can't copy your story, your personality, your authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are all things that are so important from a branding point.
Right.
That whole being, I talk about having a three-dimensional brand, in work, in life, and in the world, because that's who we really are.
Yep.
It's who we really are, and people don't expect us to be perfect. They don't want. I mean, do you really want to hang out with people who are perfect?
Right. Right.
I can't think of anything more intimidating actually than that.
Well, and we talk so much about our brand and building that know, like, and trust. And that's what your podcast does for you. When you share your story on your podcast, people get to know you. They get to know things about you. They know my dog's name. They know my kid's name. They know where my kids, my son's in hockey, my daughter's in college. They know those things about me. And that's how friendships are formed. If you think of your best friend and all of the things you know about your best friend because they've told you those stories, that's what your podcast does for you. You tell those stories and it allows your audience to get to understand what you value and what you believe in and how you operate. And when you trust them with your vulnerability, with your mistakes and with the personal things about yourself, that law of reciprocity kicks in where you give them your trust, they give you their trust in return. And so when you're looking for people to trust you, you show that you trust them by sharing those things about you in your stories. And the law of reciprocity kicks in and they begin to trust you in return because they have that relationship.
Yeah, that's so true. And that whole piece about people learning, to think of you as a friend, to understand those situations, but I'm wondering, because you have mentioned story so many times, and I know, because I went through it myself, that people have a hard time figuring out, once you get it, everything's a story,
Right.
but it's hard to get to that point. Could you speak to that a minute?
So many people try to make story more difficult than it needs to be. The story doesn't need to be really long. It doesn't need to be earth shattering. It doesn't need to be earth moving. It just needs to be a little piece about you. Today on the, I just recorded my latest episode. I'm up to 469 episodes of Podcast Talent Coach.
That's so
and
good.
I just recorded the one today. And I'm talking about speaking, how to land stages, how to get on stage and speak in front of a crowd. And so I told a story about speaking in front of high school hockey players. So I coach high school hockey, and we were having our annual banquet. And they said, "Eric, you're on the radio. You should be our MC." They all say that. You speak on the radio. You can speak on stage. Come do it. And so I said, "Okay, great. I will be the MC." And I said, "Just tell me what to say and I'll say it. I'm a talking head." So there's about 150 high school boys in this room and their parents. It's a large crowd, big banquet hall. I'm on stage at a podium, and they give me the script. Now, they've written the script for me. It's in a binder. I did not write it. When you write a speech, we write much differently than we speak. So if you're ever reading a speech, make sure you proofread it first, because it will be very difficult if it's written the way you write and not the way you speak. So in this particular speech that I did not write, it says the season got off to a fast start, and saying fast start quickly is challenging. And so as I'm on stage reading this, it comes out, the season got off to a fart. And as you can imagine, 150 boys, high school boys, break out in laughter, and most of their parents do as well. So I can do nothing but stand there on stage and wait for the laughter to die down before I begin again. And I say, or as some people like to say, fast start, which brought another laugh.
Yeah. What a great way to reach the audience.
It's a way for me to share a story on my podcast about me. So through that, you learn that I coach high school hockey. You learn that I'm able to speak on stage. You learn
Mhm.
that I too make mistakes and put my
Mhm.
foot in my mouth and embarrass myself. But I'm okay laughing at myself as well. So
Yeah.
finding little stories like that, just being curious and being aware of the things that happen in your everyday life that show that you're human,
Mhm.
things that you learn, you just incorporate those into your content, and that is how you find story. It's just the one little nugget. My radio coach used to say, "What do you want to make the audience laugh at, marvel at, or better understand?" And when you
Mhm.
can find little stories in your life that help them do that, that's the story to share. And it can be a little story, it can be a big story. It doesn't have to be standing on stage in front of 150 high school hockey players. It could be on the ride home yesterday when I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to Brendan Burchard's podcast, and he has 4 minutes of commercials at the beginning, 4 minutes of commercials in the middle, 4 minutes of commercials at the end, and I was about ready to choke him because people are fleeing traditional media to get away from commercials and advertisers. Why do you want
Yeah.
to do that to your podcast? It's the worst way to monetize your show. Now, there's a little story. It just folded right into my content. It made
Yeah.
my point, and I move on. So your
Yeah.
stories don't have to be big, audacious stories, just
Mhm.
a little something to show that you're a true individual, authentic, your personality, your style, what you believe in, how you operate, why people should connect with you.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly right. And I'm going to ask you a really okay uninformed question. We'll put
Okay.
this
All right.
because I'm thinking of people, with their questions about this. And I know when I work with people, they're always asking me, well, when should I post?
Yeah.
What works better? How long should it be? All those kinds of things. And I think people might have those kinds of questions.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So don't make it harder than it needs to be. There's no magic formula. There was a study done recently where they looked at the top 200 podcasts in Apple Podcasts because they wanted to answer the age old question, how long should my podcast be?
yeah, exactly.
Everybody wants to know. And what they found of the top 200 podcasts in Apple Podcasts, 50% were longer than an hour, 50% were shorter than an hour. So there really isn't a magic number of how long it should be. The key is
Mhm.
consistency. People like what they know and they know what they like. And if your podcast is 40 minutes, then it should be roughly 40 minutes every week because people are creatures of habit and they ask
Mhm.
themselves, I'm going to listen to Dumont's podcast this week. Where does it fit into my life? I know Dumont's
Mhm.
podcast is 40 minutes long usually. My workout is 45 minutes long. I
So,
can listen to Dumont's podcast.
yeah.
Or my commute to work is 20 minutes. I can
Mhm.
listen to half of Dumont's podcast on the way to work and half of the podcast on the way home from work. So they're
Yeah.
trying to figure out how it fits into their life. If this
Mhm.
week it's 15 minutes and next week it's an hour and a half and then it's 40,
Yeah.
they can't figure out how it fits in.
That's
So
a really good
rather
point.
than saying how long should it be, just make it consistent. Now, that doesn't mean it always has to be consistent. If you're interviewing some incredible guru, expert, like high, top notch guest in
Mhm.
your industry, and your interview goes an hour and a half, let it go an hour and a half. Like, break the rule, but it should be an exception. It
Right.
should be
And,
an
and
exception.
and saying we're doing this longer today because we have this fabulous guest.
Right. Or you could break it into two, right? We can make
Yeah.
it two 45-minute shows, either
Yeah.
one, something like
Yeah.
that. So that answers the question, how long should it be? When
Mhm.
should I post is the next one they always ask.
Mhm.
What's the magic day? They're looking at podcasting as if it were radio or television. Like I have to show up Tuesday nights at 7 to watch my favorite show.
Mhm.
Podcasting's on demand. They're going to listen whenever they want to listen. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter what day, what time you podcast, because they're going to listen when it's right for them.
Mhm.
Now, again, the key is consistency. If you select Wednesdays at 3 to publish your show, you better be there every Wednesday at 3.
Mhm.
Because if I choose to listen Thursday mornings during my workout, I want your new episode to be there. So if you're publishing Wednesday this week and Friday next week, and now I can't get in the habit of listening to your show every Thursday. I listen to my favorite podcast every Saturday when I'm working around the house. I'm either mowing the yard, shoveling the driveway, working in the garage, cleaning the basement, whatever I'm doing. Saturday mornings, I listen to my favorite show. That show is published Friday mornings. It doesn't matter to me that it publishes on Friday mornings. I'm still going to listen on Saturday. But if he didn't publish Friday and he published Saturday night, now all of a sudden I go to listen and it's not there for me. So people are creatures of habit. Be consistent and make yourself part of that habit.
Yeah, and it's that whole concept of friendship again. That you're there, and we all know. Actually, it's better than friendship in some ways because we all have friends who disappear for long periods of time.
Right. So it's like the mail in your mailbox, right? If you check the mail every day at 2, you go out and you get the mail every day at 2. You don't care if the mail's delivered at 10 or 12, as long as it's there by 2, right? But if you go out there at 2 and it's not there because he's not coming until 5, you're like, what happened? I expected the mail to be there by 2 when I go out to get it. Now, it doesn't matter if he delivers every day at 10 or every day at 12. As long as he's consistent, it's always there by 2 when you're ready to go check it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because we are creatures of habit.
Absolutely.
So if you were to be starting with a total novice who has never done anything like this, and they're wondering, just how to, just even how to dip their toe into this.
Sure.
What would be the first thing you'd tell them?
Start with the end in mind. Figure out where you want to take your ideal client. What is it that you're trying to offer? So I love using the podcast as a tool to market your business. So many podcasts fade away because they get it launched and then they go, okay, now what? Like, now that it's launched, what do I do with it? And they have a tough time coming up with content, and they have a tough time producing it on a regular basis because they started at the wrong end. If you start with the end in mind and you understand where you're trying to take your ideal client, where are you trying to lead them? Figure out where your offer happens, and then build it backwards, and you'll figure out how to build the podcast in the right way. So are you going to do a solo show or an interview style show? Well, I don't know. Where are we trying to take the listener? Where do you want to lead them? If you're trying to use your podcast to grow your network, then do an interview style show. If you're trying to use your podcast to grow your authority, do a solo show. If you want to do both of them. Do a solo show one week and an interview the next week, because it allows you to build your authority with your solo show, and it allows you to build your network with your interview show. But there's a way to do both. So when you figure out where you're taking your client, where you want to lead that listener. So let's say I sell coaching. My goal is to get listeners to a one-on-one strategy call with me so I can enlist them in my coaching. I want to create content on the podcast that will lead them to a strategy call with me. So now that I can figure out how to create that content to lead them to that strategy call, I have my ideal listener and I know where to find them, and I give them a reason to come and listen to the show because I give them this great content that will eventually lead them to the strategy call with me and enroll them as clients. So if you're just starting out, start with the end in mind, figure out where you want the podcast to lead to. You make revenue with your podcast, not from your podcast. Your podcast isn't the revenue generator. It's not kicking off revenue. You're not making revenue from the podcast. You're using the podcast to market your revenue generator. So you're making money with the podcast. The podcast builds the relationship and leads your listeners to the revenue generator. It leads them to that sales conversation.
That makes a lot of sense. I really hadn't thought of it that way. It's really interesting to hear what actually composes it, and I've been on LinkedIn for a while. That's where I play.
Right.
And even LinkedIn, they got into this late, but even they have set up something where you can take that podcast and even redo parts of it, on LinkedIn, which, is just another avenue. But but I know that that's not everybody's cup of tea and where they want to go. So when
Well,
you,
even Dumont, even with LinkedIn, like people say, how do I make money with LinkedIn?
yeah,
Well, LinkedIn isn't giving you money. You're using LinkedIn to market what is
absolutely,
generating the revenue.
absolutely,
But when they look at podcasting, they expect podcasting to just give them money. And you need to look
yeah,
at podcasting as the same content creation that you would do on LinkedIn or your blog or your email. It is content you're creating that will generate interest in your sales conversation. Where are you having that sales conversation? Might be a long form sales video. It might be a one-on-one strategy call. It might be a
mm-hmm,
webinar. Wherever you have that sales conversation,
mm-hmm,
let your podcast content lead to that conversation, and then get super clear on your target listener. I was working with my client Ava yesterday on her ideal target listener, and she says, well, they're between 35 and 58. And I said, Ava, your ideal listener can't be between 35 and 58. I said a 35-year-old probably has kids that are around 8 or 10. She's
mm-hmm,
got a career that's going to last another 35 years. Like,
mm-hmm,
she's in a much different place. You're going to tell her much different stories. You're going to share much different examples than a 58-year-old whose kids are out of college. She's got maybe another dozen years in her career before she wants to retire. She's in a much different
yeah,
place in life. You're going to tell her much different stories and give her much different examples than you will the 35-year-old. So you need to pick
mm-hmm,
one. You can't afford to talk to both, because when you talk to both, you'll reach neither one of them, because
yeah,
your content won't be perfect for either one. You need to be perfect for one or the other. Doesn't mean it won't be relevant to the other one. It
right.
just won't be perfect.
Right, and I know a lot of people who actually only work with women, or who only work, with another population, and yeah, there are other people who are interested in it.
Right.
But what you're turning out is what that specific population would want. And it's like pulling teeth sometimes to get people to understand that they really do need to niche in. And that has been a common theme on this summit, is that you really need to clarify who that ideal client, I guess is the way that we could put it.
Yeah.
And, I think with everything that's going on right now, in the world, people are really looking for that reassuring voice that you're talking about. It gives us something to hang our hat on. It's comfort. And this has been a time when a lot of people are seeking comfort, because we're living through turbulent times.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe it just seems important to us, but I think history will unfortunately, we can't know right now.
Well, and there are multiple ways to attract your ideal clients with your podcast. A lot of people think, well, I need to turn my listeners into clients. Like, that's the only
Mhm.
way to monetize your podcast, but it's not really. You could one of my favorite ways to monetize your podcast is to interview prospective clients. Like, it's so hard. People
Oh,
people come to me and they say, "Man, I'm struggling to get potential clients on my one-on-one strategy call." And I said, well, invite them to be a guest on your podcast then, and interview them on the podcast about their challenges. Basically, go through the questions in your strategy call as an
that's
episode of the
great.
podcast. And instead of inviting them to a sales call, invite them to be a guest on your show.
Oh,
Who's
what
going to
a
say
great.
no? Who's going to turn that down? Get them as a guest on the show. Build a relationship with them as a guest. Let them see how you serve, and then turn your guests into clients. That's just
That's,
another way. So I know we're going to get to the gift that I have to offer, but the
yeah.
gift that I offer is 5 secret strategies to attract your ideal clients with your podcast. And that's my favorite one that's in that gift is to leverage it. Zoe came to me. Zoe is a consultant down in New Zealand and Australia, and she helps leaders of businesses break down the silos in their companies so their departments work better together. She says she's an expert on people stuff. And so when she came to me, she said, I said, what are your downloads? How many listeners do you have? And she goes, I don't know. I don't even look at that. That's not why I use my podcast. And I said, really? You don't even care what your downloads are? Not? She goes, no, the only reason I have a podcast is so I can interview potential clients. Because when I call them to get a meeting with them, I can't get past the gatekeeper. But when I call them to invite them on the podcast,
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they say yes.
Wow.
And then
That's just great.
she says, I have that conversation with them. Then I have a conversation with them to schedule the interview. Then I have a conversation with them to set up the interview. Like, here's what the interview is going to be about. Then we do the interview. And then I have a 5th conversation with them when the interview is published. And by this time, we have a relationship. And now we can talk about working together. And I said, Zoe, that is genius. I love it. And so that's in that 5 secret strategies to attract your ideal clients. That's my favorite one. But there are so many ways to monetize your podcast by attracting your ideal clients. And we're talking high ticket coaching clients. Like, if you get that individual on your show and you start building a relationship, they're like, wow, he's not such a bad guy after all. Like, let's work together. And it leads, and maybe it doesn't necessarily lead to a working relationship, but maybe they introduce you to other people and endorse you and get you more high ticket coaching clients.
Yeah, that's nothing like having those raving fans to go out there and sing your song.
Yes, absolutely.
And spread the word. So, Eric, this has just been an eye-opener. We've talked before, but I never thought of some of these things in that strategy. Oh my gosh, inviting, a prospective client. I feel like the scales just fell from my eyes.
Yeah. It gives you a stage that you can swap with others. When it comes to digital marketing, it's finding ways to do the same thing differently. It's how are we getting in front of a new audience in a different way to build a relationship with them, whether that's on a summit or on a podcast, whether they're in the audience or whether they're on stage with you. There are a variety of ways to do it. So find different ways to have conversations with your ideal client and turn them into paying customers.
Wow, that is great advice. So, Eric, I really thank you for this, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Dumont. And if you ever need anything, reach out to Dumont. She can connect you with me, or just email me at any time. My contact information in the app. And I would love to talk podcasting. I can talk podcasting all day long. Dumont, it was an honor to be invited to be part of the Digital Marketing Summit again. And thanks for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Eric. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely.